Hey everyone, welcome back to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today we're going to be continuing my 7-part series, How to Step Up Your Lightroom Game. This is part 6, Finalizing Your Finals. So finally, we are closing in on finalizing our files and prepping them for the client preview. So most of your time spent in Lightroom is editing. And so even with this part where we're exporting our files, we still want to be efficient through every process that we do. So that starts with sorting and syncing by capture time. It's always best to sync your capture time, of course, prior to culling, but in this case, I'm going to show you how to change that so you can match all of the second shooter files to the main shooter's time, so everything's in capture time synced. It's very important, so that way your images follow the same chronological order throughout the day when you're telling your story. Once you get those synced, you're ready to rename the files. And I'm going to show you how doing that in Lightroom is a better alternative than waiting for exporting. You can rename your files in Lightroom. It's a great process to keep everything organized. Also, I'm going to look at publishing files to Instagram. We lost support for that a little earlier this year, and there's a plugin that works, for certain users, of course, but using the publish services over exporting the images. I like to export myself, but we'll explore some of those publish service features. Go through some export presets, exporting with droplets, so you can apply actions in Lightroom. Export makes things super fast. The goal with this is to export, let it run its process, and you can walk away. It's my favorite thing to do. So let's jump into sorting and syncing. All right, so now we're ready to do sorting and sync capture time. So the first thing that we want to do is we have to be in the library module, right? So at the very bottom, you have the sort option, and you can sort by capture time, which is at the top, and probably my most used one, but you have all these other sorting options to use. Now this is going to be the order in which you're seeing the files, not necessarily the same thing as applying attributes, right? So if I uncheck my 5 stars, it's going to be all my unselected and my selected files. At this stage, we just want to be looking at the ones that I selected, ready to deliver to the client. Now, since capture time is something that I use and most popularly is used by different users for Lightroom, you want to make sure all the cameras are synced by capture time. And so what I mean by that is you want to make sure to sort by serial number so you can divide out all of your cameras. Now I know if you're using a Sony, it might be difficult to do that because it just says unknown. So if you have multiple Sony cameras, I don't really have a fix for you. Otherwise, if you're working with Canon, Nikon, Fuji, any of those, you'll have access to the camera serials. So what you'll notice is if I sort to the main photographer's camera, I've already chosen an image that's shot by both cameras, right? The main shooter and the second shooter. So I've already figured out, okay, this is my specific scene. The bride putting on her earrings in the same moment that the groom's watching, right? This is one of those specific scenarios where the groom and the bride are kind of getting ready together. It's a little less conventional. There's not a first look. I guess this would be the first look, if you will, that they're in the hotel room together. So with this, I can take my main shooter's camera, which I can make sure to choose the serial number with the most chosen, and choose that red label. And we want to go in here to see what time I photographed this, right? So in this particular case, I can look at, it was shot at 1 p.m. on June 16th. Now, if I want to change this, like if that date is wrong, I can go in and change that capture time, and I can adjust this to whatever I want. Say if it was July 16th, and we'll just say if this is 1 p.m., we can change it to noon. Whatever we want to do, we can change all that stuff. We can do that here. But the most important thing when you're syncing capture time is sync it to the main photographer's camera. So we're going to write that down, right? We want to write down 1 p.m. On June 16th, right? We want to make sure all of these things are taken into consideration. So when we go to the second photographer's camera, we're going to filter to that red image, so that way that's the one that's selected. And we'll select all the images as well. So it's not just, we're mainly changing this camera, but as soon as I do that, it's immediately going to change the sync time for all of those. So let me go through that process one more time. So you're going to want to first filter to the red one. We'll go to all, and then we'll do Command A to select all the cameras. So this is going to let us change the capture time for this particular frame, which is the one that we want to do. Now in this particular frame, it's already synced up, but say it wasn't, we'd want to change this to 6:16, 01, 00, 5. We could do 5:9, and it would follow. It would follow suit. We'll change all the cameras. So now when we go back to all of them, they're immediately following. So when we have main photographer's camera, and then our second shooter's camera, which is right behind it. Very important, right? So that's how you sync capture time. Now, if you have multiple cameras and they're not all shooting the same moment, you might want to choose like the first kiss at the altar. If all the photographers are shooting, you might have to pair 2 cameras and then pair another 2. But you always want to make sure to pair to the main camera or choose one to make sure all of them sync too. That's very, very important. So now that we've done that, we're ready to move on to custom ordering. All right, so we've already kind of touched on the capture time, but now if you want to do an option that's called custom sort, we're going to have to set up a collection. Now, the reason why is because you can't take images and just start moving them around, right? It's going to tell you that it's not supported for this particular sort feature. So we have to add all of the images to a collection, which I've already done here called custom sort, but we're going to do it again. So I'm going to go ahead and select all the images. And I'm going to go down to collections. I'm going to hit plus. I'm going to do create collection. And I'm going to call this, we'll just call it reorder. Now I can choose all the selected images will automatically go into this, let's see, reorder files. They'll automatically go into this collection, which is perfect. So I'll go ahead and click create. Now what I can do is I can start moving my files around. So I've already kind of taken these and put them into the sorting order that I want. But specifically, if I want to take all of the groom's details, all of the bride's details, or maybe I want to bring the bride and have bring all of her details in first, if that's something that I want to show off, I can do that. So I can grab all of these bride details here, take all of those, click and drag to the beginning of the session and throw them all at the front. Oh, wrong. Make sure I'm clicking in the window. So we'll click on the first one, click and drag these up. Lightroom's being very sensitive, so keep in mind you can always undo. We're going to make sure that we're choosing right at the front. I'll drop them, and now all of these files are at the front. And you see that my sorting changes to custom order. So you can start to retell the story even if it's out of chronological order, but if you want to start with the bride details and you want to put the groom details together, you certainly can. And then if you want to keep, maybe you want to keep the venue or the hotel that they're getting ready at, you want those to be kind of the first shots. You can drag those up. Oh, well, it's not really letting me. Not sure why it's doing that. There we go. So we can now put these at the beginning. We have the bride details all thrown together. Now we can maybe do the groom details if you want, or the ring shots. That might be a good follow-up there. So if you just want to grab some of these ring shots, we can do that. And that maybe would follow the bride details there. Then we could do the groom details if you want. So if you want to put all those detail shots together, why not? You can do that, and then you can start to separate everything out by bride getting ready, groom getting ready, of course, however you want to do that. But that's how you do custom order. I've also done it here when I'm done with my files. I usually start with the groom's getting ready, all those files put together, and then I got the rings coming in, the rings with the shoes and the dress, all those details. So it's all about the groom up front. Let's get that over with and show off the bride's getting ready details. So after we do the custom order, we're ready to do the renaming. All right, so now that we have our custom order in place, we want to make sure to choose that specific collection, and now we can rename our files. Now, I'm a fan of renaming the files in Lightroom for 2 reasons. One, because it's super fast to do, of course, Lightroom, you want to be efficient, but also it renames the files and the originals. And why that's important is that everything that's in Lightroom and how it's connected, you want those things to be organized and you want to do everything through Lightroom. So in the same way that I'm creating subfolders here in Lightroom, I want to rename and write Lightroom. So that way when I have the ability to go back to my original files, I can, but I can also revert these renamed files back to the original, which I'll show you in just a second. So what I'm going to do with my 1,177 files that I selected and custom sorted, I'm going to select them all. I'm going to choose the first image, of course, just to make sure that I'm clear on that. You want to choose the first image and then select all. Now I'm going to go to File Name. I'm going to click on Custom Settings and I'm going to go to Edit. Now, original file name is listed here, but what I want to do is I want to create a custom, I want to rename these files to personalize them for my client, right? So I remember the shooting date, capture date is June 16th, 2018. So June 16, 2018, just like that. And then I'm going to do an underscore because I like to use underscores. It's a safer way to name files. I'm going to do the last name. And then I'm going to do underscore. I'm going to abbreviate what this session is. It's a wedding, underscore. Now I need to add in a sequence number. So that way it adds a sequence number and counts up. So I like to do 4 digits. So I'm going to go ahead and click insert. And so as you automatically see how the example of the first file is going to change, I'm going to click done. I'm going to click OK. And what's really awesome is now it's going to change these files. You see these exclamation points? It's going to change those in the original folder as well. So I go to folder, I can look, let's see here, I can only do this with one file at a time, but you can do show in Finder, and now you can see those files are renamed right there. So it's pretty awesome. It renames them in my originals folder. That's very important, right? Because you want everything to be still linked in Lightroom. You still want to have access. The only thing you would need to do is now that you have original files and renamed, this is the awesome part, right? So now you're thinking, well, I backed up all of my raw files in multiple places. Now I have to resave over this new file name. Well, no, not exactly. Remember, this is just for finalizing the file and giving them to a client. If you need to go back and figure out what the original file name is for this file here, you can go back to it. All you have to do is go back to File Name, click on Custom Settings, click on Edit. You can get rid of all of this. You can click on Original File Name. Boom. Now that file will go back to its original file name and you don't have any problems. Even if you want to add files to this, rename later, you can do all of that. It's pretty awesome. So, of course, you want to make sure, in renaming this file, now it's going to be out of my sequence, so I'd have to go back in, rename this, and we want to make sure 06/17/2018 underscore client underscore W. Now I have to put in the custom. I think that file is 14. We'll go ahead and hit done. Okay. Right, so now we're back in our order. So with that done, now you've already renamed the files. They're in the originals folder and you're all ready to go. Now, what you can do also with the renaming is you can create a preset. So the next time that I want to do this, and I want to kind of create a preset for the client, I can put in, 01/01/2019, and then I'll put in um, last name underscore event, and then I can add the sequence here. Then I can click on preset and I can save current settings as a new preset, and I will just call this renaming, renaming clients. Done. So the next time that I want to quickly sort to that same style, I can, but then I can also go to edit and add in everything that I need to. So it's pretty awesome, pretty fast. Presets are a great add-on for Lightroom just to make things super fast. But remember, if you need to revert files back to their Let's go ahead and hit cancel. If you need to revert files back to their originals, you can, and you can do it with all of them. We'll select all, file name, custom settings, edit, select all, and then just add the original file name. Now, it's important that you save this catalog, because if you don't save this catalog, you can't revert these files. So I want to be clear on that. The fact that we renamed these files in this catalog means that I can revert them back to the originals. If you take these raw files, import them into a new catalog, that will be considered the original name. So you got to remember that when you import the files in, whatever names they are, Lightroom will save that data as the original file name. So I want to be very clear on that. So you can only revert back to the originals in this actual catalog that we created. But now we're ready to move on to publish services, and just to go through a few options with that service. All right, so let's move on to publish services. Many of you maybe have used this before in the past for Instagram or posting to Facebook, but you can certainly use a lot of client proofing sites like for SmugMug and ShootProof and EnView. A lot of them have Lightroom publish plugins that you can use. So in the publish services, you have all your default options here, and this Lightroom Instagram, this plugin that I downloaded, that doesn't seem to be working for me to give me ability to post directly to Instagram. But I want to show you how the publish services work and how you can customize publish exporting and renaming and things like that. So in the publish services, you can click on the plus and go to Publishing Manager, and this is where you can choose per app how you want your files to be, okay, how you want your files to be renamed and changed. So you have all these different preferences that you can do specifically for your um, your different publish services. You can go into Plugin Manager, and this is where you can add in different plugins for your publish services. So that's pretty cool. Registering and status, all this kind of these different options here for Lightroom. But the go ahead. Okay. So this is kind of an archaic and a little, it's probably a service that I don't necessarily use personally for published services. Some people find that it makes things a little bit faster, just to, instead of having to export and upload, this kind of does everything in one click. So depending on what your client proofing site is and what program, what company and app you're using, this may be a great option for you. But it's a little outdated since they got rid of the Lightroom sync and started going to cloud. It's just something that they haven't really developed too much within Lightroom. But you're more than welcome to use it. Like this, for Facebook, you have all these different options for how you're exporting, album name. You can do a lot of different settings in the same way that you have for export. So that way you can still control different file settings and sizes and things like that. Becomes very important when posting to Facebook within their limitations. So these are just some quick publish service options that you can use. The Lightroom Instagram one hasn't really been working too much for me. Every time I log in, it gives me errors. But this Lightroom Instagram, it's a donateware, which means that you can donate money for it to use it. But it allows access to post back to Instagram. We lost that ability with recent Lightroom updates this past summer with the Publishing Manager, which I think was the most useful option for Lightroom to post directly to Instagram. But now you kind of have to export your images and upload through their app. So that's published services, but we're ready to move on to the next steps. All right, now we're ready to export, use export presets, and incorporate our Photoshop droplets or actions at export. So let's jump into the export module and kind of go through the different options. So you have the export location, that's just the destination where these files are going to go. File naming, which we've already covered. Since we renamed in Lightroom, we'll just leave the files as they are. But this is your option for file naming if you want to do something very specific, like you want to export blog images, JPEG specifically named for the blog, but you want that separate from the raw file for whatever reason, you can do that. Same goes with the file settings. You can set the quality for the JPEGs. These other settings here, like originals, if you wanted to export your raw files, with renamed RAWs, or save the RAW files in a new location, like copies of them. This is a great way to export original files. So, or save DNGs, however you want to do that. But you can save another copy of your files quite quickly out of Lightroom, and it does it super fast. So that's another kind of hidden secret not a lot of people use, is you can export the by original file type, which would keep the RAW files as well. You have image size. I always recommend keeping the resolution at 300. Usually it defaults at 240 for some odd reason, but a lot of actions and a lot of things you're doing in Photoshop, you want them to be at 300 so they're sized correctly. Output sharpening, pretty self-explanatory. That's sharpening for the screen, paper, things like that. Not too useful. I usually do all my output sharpening in Photoshop specifically. Metadata. This is actually pretty important. When you export a JPEG and you want to bring it back into the catalog and you want that to go into time sync order, like you want it to be in the same order as your RAW files, including all the metadata becomes super important in there. I mean, you can do everything. You can include multiple different options here, but I definitely recommend keeping the metadata on there so that way you can bring it back in. Of course, if you want to hide that data and don't want it online, I get it, but that's what that's going to remove in here. I usually keep all the metadata applied. Watermark, not something I typically use in here, but you can of course apply a watermark and apply a file you have, maybe a PNG, to add your logo to some images. But this post-processing option is really awesome. A lot of you might have used it to where you open files up directly into Photoshop, but what you can also do is apply a droplet, which means that it'll export out of Lightroom, automatically open into Photoshop, run an automation process, and it'll apply an action to every image, save it, and close. So this is something to where, when you're exporting images and it might take an hour and you want to apply an action, then you got to apply that action in Photoshop as well and come back. You can do it all in one fell swoop, and you can walk away from the computer, let it finish, and come back. It's a really awesome feature here, but it requires you to, have an action to apply, right? So before we do that, let's jump into Photoshop and pull up an action that we want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on this, and I'm going to do, let's see, we'll just do this. We can do edit in Photoshop if we want. Sure, why not? So I'll have this open up into Photoshop, and we can either create an action, or we can use one of the ones that I already have in place. So opening this file up into Photoshop, I have a few different workflow actions that I like to apply. Now, if I want to, let's see, let's duplicate that layer. Sure, copy. Portraiture is a very useful um, action that I like to apply, just so that way the image automatically has this level of portraiture applied to it. Of course, this may be a little too heavy, but it's a perfect kind of it's a perfect action that I would apply to every image before it would go up on a proofing site, or before I'd show the client in their slideshow. It just makes the image look that much more retouched and polished, really. And then I can always apply like something on top of it, right? So if I wanted to have that plus maybe a high pass sharpening, just to bring back some sharpening on top of that, look at that. The difference between here and there, I mean, that's huge. I can apply that high pass sharpening so that way her dress doesn't get super out of focus. I think that that's very important. We don't want the dress to get too soft. But those are the perfect kind of actions. Now, if I wanted to apply those together, of course, I would have to create a new action that has high pass along with some skin softening. So let's do that. So I already have some actions put together, but maybe I want to create a new output one. So I'm going to do, we'll just do create a new action. We'll call this skin softening plus sharpen. If I could spell. And we'll go ahead and we'll leave it in the workflow. I'll click record. And now I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my background layer as always, the first step. Then I'm going to apply portraiture. And then I'm going to go back to my background layer and I am going to apply high pass sharpening. And I want that to be on top of the portraiture. Now I want to zoom into 100% and make sure, I don't need to crop. Make sure my settings are good. Now maybe I want to take high pass and I want to take it to overlay. I want it to be a little stronger. It's a little too heavy. Maybe we'll go back to soft light. But we can make all these tweaks, right? Just super quick. And maybe I'll take portraiture down just a little bit where it's not so heavy-handed. And now I have just a nice application of softening the skin. I like the way that looks. And now I'm going to hit stop. So it'll apply those actions. Now, this is where it becomes really important, right? Did I want to have that flatten within the action? Did I want to have it, do I want the automation to choose if it flattens or not? So you can definitely have different options if you want it to flatten or not. I'm going to leave it off for now, but what I need to do now that I've created my action is I need to come in here and I need to save that as a droplet. So I'm going to do create droplet, and I'm going to choose where I want this droplet to go, which it's going to go in my documents folder, in the Adobe folder, and my droplets, and I can save it right in here. So I want to call this export skin smoothing plus sharpen. I'll hit save. It'll go and it's going to play this specific workflow action. Now I'm going to have this save and close, override save as commands, and so that way I can get I can update that. So we'll go ahead and hit click OK. And now that that's done, I can click X off that. I'll hit don't save. And I always test out to see how this is going to work. Because it always depends on how you have the droplet set up. You want to make sure it exports correctly. All right, so let's apply this droplet into our export preset. So what I can do is I can go in and create a new user preset, and I'm going to call it export. Skin smooth plus sharpen. Now that I'm doing that, I can choose, I want this particular job. Let's see here, working, weddings. I want to make sure this goes to my export. So I'll just have it go there. I'll create a subfolder called 06 export. And now I can make sure all my settings are correct. I want them to be JPEGs, 300, metadata, all that stuff is good. And I want to open in another application, right? So I'm going to make sure that that's selected, and I hit choose, and then I need to go find that specific droplet that we created. Now I can do this. I can right click and do update with current settings. So now when I choose this, it automatically has that set up. Now the only thing I would change in this likely is obviously where my destination folder is going to go, but it'll always go into an 06 export, and it'll always apply this. So it's very important to choose to create an export preset. I think that makes things super quick and fast to refer back to or recall old settings. So when I click export, let's see how this thing runs. Now Photoshop gives me an error, and likely might give me an error for saving as the image. Since there are layers and it's saving a JPEG, it might give me an error, but let's see what it does. Looks like we should be solid. Let's take a look at how it saved that file. Go to working, we will go to weddings, export. Oh, looks like it applied it correctly. So it applied everything already as I needed to. So we didn't have to put flatten in the action, which I usually recommend not putting flatten in there, especially if you're going to apply it to an image with like a PSD. Then you lose that editability. It kind of makes it destructive for editing. So as you can see, we didn't necessarily need to change anything with the droplet. We did the override action save as, so because this was checked and we did save and close, it automatically flattened that file for us and overrode it. So that's definitely useful and a recommended setting. But that's basically it. Now we're ready to go into Lightroom. We can select all the files and do that same thing. And then you're really done once the process is completed. All right, that's pretty much it. Now that you're ready to export, walk away and let the computer do the work, you can finally take a break. So whether you are posting to your proofing site or prepping the slideshow for your IPS, things like custom sorting and renaming and export settings, those things matter. Taking the time to create presets, um, you know, creating a custom order, customizing and personalizing these images not only make your whole make your clients feel like they're getting a total service, but it really gives the images a professional appeal. So I definitely recommend the renaming, the custom sorting. Make this wedding your own. You talk about branding, you talk about the editing is what the clients are coming to you for. They're seeing that on the website, but this total service, these things, this custom sorting and renaming, and applying these things, there's ways to do it fast, but the client also feels like you're giving them that personal attention, which I think is huge for their client experience. So take some time. Hopefully you've learned something through this process. I know finalizing files, it's not the most glorious part of the workflow, but now we're done. So speaking of that, tune in next month for part 7 of my Lightroom workflow series, Life After Lightroom. So I'm going to cover in-depth Photoshop workflows, posting to social media, archiving your finished files, and many more Lightroom output options. So tune in next month and I have more to show you.